There is a really bizarre, but, well, absolute biological fact that completely changes how you view your own brain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like the counter in your head right now, the one that's constantly scanning the room and tracking your social status, it is a third of a billion years old.
Which is just staggering to think about.
It really is. I mean, that makes the neurological hardware you use to figure out where you fit in older than trees, literally. And it runs on the exact same neurochemical serotonin as lobsters.
It's a stunning piece of evolutionary continuity. I mean, if you take a lobster that has just been completely defeated in a fight for territory, it will physically collapse. It curls up, its serotonin levels just plummet, and it won't fight again. It's done. But, and this is the crazy part, if you inject that defeated lobster with the exact same SSRI antidepressants that are prescribed to humans.
With the exact same ones?
The exact same ones. It will physically uncurl, stand up straight, and go right back into the fight for its status.
That is just wild. So our posture, our confidence, our very ability to take on the world is regulated by this ancient mechanism that basically just wants to know if we are winning or losing.
Exactly. It's hardwired into us.
And that biological reality sets up the entire premise for today's deep dive. We are unpacking a massive stack of transcripts from 3 really extensive conversations featuring clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson.
Yes, some really dense material here.
Yeah, we're looking at his deep dive discussions on his book, 12 Rules for Life, his sit down on the Diary of a CEO, and a really long-form interview with Chris Williamson.
And, I mean, these are intense, wide-ranging conversations. They span across developmental psychology, evolutionary biology, ancient mythology, and, of course, modern human behavior. We are really looking at the underlying architecture of how human beings operate and find meaning.
Right, and our mission today is to extract the most actionable, mind-bending frameworks from these discussions about, personal responsibility, meaning, and confronting the darker parts of human nature.
The shadow.
Exactly. Now, we should probably explicitly mention up front that these discussions occasionally touch on polarized political ideas.
Yeah, like analyzing the psychological temperaments of left-wing versus right-wing individuals, things like that.
Right. But our goal here is strictly impartial exploration. We aren't taking sides. We aren't endorsing specific politics. We are simply unpacking the fascinating psychological mechanisms contained in the original material.
Right, we are just lifting the hood to see how the engine works, regardless of who happens to be driving the car.
I like that. So let's start with that lobster software. If our brains are biologically hardwired to care about status, how do you successfully navigate the human world without just faking it to get to the top?
Because putting on a mask seems to be the default strategy, right?
Exactly. For a lot of people trying to climb the hierarchy, faking it is step 1.
Well, putting on that mask is what Carl Jung called the persona. Peterson uses a really brilliant analogy here involving the story of Pinocchio.
Okay, Pinocchio.
Yeah, think about what Pinocchio is at the very start of the story. He is a puppet, and he's an actor.
Right.
If you live your entire life through a carefully crafted persona-like, a mask designed purely to make you popular or wealthy or desirable, you are essentially a puppet.
Oh, wow.
And that forces 2 pretty terrifying questions. Who exactly wrote your role, and who is pulling your strings?
Okay, but wait, isn't faking it till you make it sometimes just functionally necessary? I mean, it's like putting on a suit for a job interview when you'd really rather be in sweatpants.
Sure.
You need that outer shell to function in a polite society. You can't just be completely unfiltered all the time, right?
No, you absolutely need a shell. Jung himself acknowledged the persona is a necessary bridge. You need an avatar to act as a mediator in casual social encounters.
Right, like running errands.
Exactly. If you walk into a bank to deposit a check, you don't want the bank teller to immediately dump their deepest existential dread and childhood trauma onto you.
Definitely not.
You want the bank teller persona.
Just here's my deposit, please don't cry.
Precisely. The pathology begins when that functional shell is all there is.
When there's nothing underneath.
Right. When the mask becomes your entire existence, you start suppressing your actual, genuine instincts. The psychological mechanism here is severe. Your unconscious mind knows you are a fraud.
It knows you're faking it.
Yes. Peterson brings up the extreme example of the pickup artist community.
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating example.
Right, because these are men who learn a highly structured form of scripted psychopathy. They feign confidence and competence to manipulate women for short-term gratification.
And even if that script technically works to get them a date, it's a total disaster for them psychologically.
Because the reward mechanism is fundamentally broken. they are getting rewarded by society for being completely fake. They receive a counterfeit reward, but the neurobiological consequence is that they are literally practicing how to be manipulative, psychopathic people.
They're training their brains to be terrible.
Exactly. They substitute a mask for genuine character development. The end result is they become utterly jaded and empty because they know deep down that nobody actually loves them.
People only love the puppet.
Exactly. People only love the puppet.
So the mask actually destroys the person wearing it.
Yeah.
Which, I guess, brings us to the antidote discussed in these transcripts, which is honesty at scale. Default conscientiousness.
Yes. And Peterson uses the origin of eBay to illustrate how this works on a societal level, which I love.
Me too. When eBay first launched, cynical financial analysts thought it would fail instantly.
Oh, they thought it was doomed.
Right, because the prevailing economic theory was that human beings are fundamentally opportunistic. Why would anyone send a physical check to a stranger across the country and trust them not to send back, like, a box filled with rocks?
It seems insane on paper.
But the cynical analysts were wrong. The fraud rate was absolutely minuscule.
It was. Brokers who tried to set up complex escrow services to protect buyers actually went out of business. The default transaction was honest.
Which is so uplifting, honestly.
It is, and it proved a massive psychological point. Conscientiousness and basic honesty are the bedrock of successful Western culture. It freed up massive amounts of frozen capital simply because the transaction friction disappeared.
People told the truth and acted with integrity, and the system worked.
Exactly.
So, societal honesty clearly works. But if dropping the persona means telling the truth to others, the material suggests the far more dangerous step is telling the truth to yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Which takes us into what psychology calls the shadow.
Yeah, confronting the shadow requires understanding how human perception matures. We all start out naive. We think the world is safe and fair. But naivety is incredibly fragile.
It shatters so easily.
It does. It's easily shattered by tragedy, betrayal, or profound suffering. When that naive worldview breaks down, it almost always collapses into cynicism.
And cynicism feels like an intellectual upgrade, doesn't it?
It really does.
Like you finally realize people can be terrible and the world is dangerous. You feel like your eyes are finally open.
It feels like wisdom, but it is actually a trap. If you stay in cynicism, it rots into resentment. It has to be replaced by courage, or it just consumes you entirely.
And the sources draw a pretty stark contrast here between two very different responses to intense suffering.
They do. On one hand, you have individuals like the Columbine killers or the historical serial killer Carl Panzram.
The Panzram's quote in the transcripts is just chilling.
It's horrific.
He literally said, "I wish the human race had one neck so that I could put my hands around it and squeeze."
That is the ultimate endpoint of unchecked cynicism. Panzram and the Columbine killers didn't just hate specific people, they made an ontological judgment against existence itself.
They decided being alive was the problem.
Yes. They decided that being was fundamentally flawed, corrupt, and painful, and they decided to exact brutal revenge on reality.
Jeez.
Conversely, you look at someone like Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He survived the brutal Eastern Front in World War II, only to be unjustly imprisoned by his own government in a Soviet gulag.
Right. If anyone had the right to be the most cynical, resentful man on earth, it was him.
Absolutely. He had Hitler and Stalin to blame for his misery.
But he refused to take that way out.
Instead of just blaming totalitarian regimes, he lay in the dark in the gulag and ruthlessly examined his own life.
That takes so much courage.
It does. He went over his memories with a fine-tooth comb to figure out how his own lies, his own moral cowardice, and his own minor failings had actually contributed to his downfall.
Wow.
He asked himself where he had betrayed his own conscience. And out of that agonizing internal reckoning came the Gulag Archipelago, which is a historical document that arguably helped bring down the entire Soviet Union.
The willingness to look at your own darkness is just terrifying. There's a historical book Peterson references called Ordinary Men that really hammers this home.
Yes, about the Nazi police battalion in World War II.
Right. And the terrifying part isn't that they were brainwashed, psychopathic zealots. They weren't. They were just ordinary middle-aged policemen, bourgeois guys from Hamburg.
And when they were ordered to commit atrocities, their commander actually gave them the option to step out of the firing squad without punishment.
And very few did.
Very few did. The psychological mechanism here is group conformity and the shadow. They didn't want to leave the quote-unquote dirty work to their comrades.
They were more afraid of being ostracized by their peers than they were of committing murder.
Exactly. The profound takeaway here is that you have to acknowledge that under the right circumstances, you could be the Nazi guard.
Which is a horrifying thought.
It is, but you have to recognize your own capacity for profound malevolence. If you pretend you are purely good, you are incredibly dangerous because you have no defense against your own dark impulses.
Right, they blindside you.
You have to know you are capable of it so you can actively, consciously choose not to do it.
There's a practical tool in this material for actually doing this, and I found it genuinely intimidating. It's called the bed exercise.
Yes, the bed exercise.
How does someone actually do this without just spiraling into self-hatred?
Well, it's an exercise in radical self-honesty. You sit on the edge of your bed at night, and you have to formulate the question properly. You can't just casually ask it.
Right, you have to mean it.
You have to be deeply, genuinely desperate for the truth. You ask yourself, what is one thing I'm doing wrong, that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, and that I would actually fix?
And your brain will just hand you an answer, just like that.
Your conscience will surface an answer almost immediately, and I guarantee it won't be an answer you want.
Of course not.
It might be something incredibly trivial like cleaning your disgustingly messy room or apologizing to someone you snapped at, but it will be the exact answer you need. It is the starting point of realigning yourself with the truth.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and you've just done the bed exercise, you are staring into the abyss of your messy room and your glaring character flaws.
Right.
How do you actually start climbing out? Because the gap between who you are right now and who you want to be, I mean, it can just paralyze you.
That paralysis is a real threat. But this connects to a fundamental truth about human neurobiology. Our dopamine systems are built for an uphill climb, not for a life free of struggle.
Okay.
Dopamine isn't the reward for hitting the summit. Dopamine is the chemical released when you perceive yourself moving toward a valued goal. We experience our most profound positive emotion enthusiasm in relation to the climb itself.
That completely flips how we view success. Like, Peterson talks about an entrepreneur who sold a business for a massive 9-figure sum.
Right.
You'd think that is the ultimate victory condition.
Right.
But the morning the check cleared, the guy was filled with dread and existential emptiness.
Because he reached the top of the hill and suddenly the dopaminergic pursuit vanished. He had nowhere left to climb.
The game was over.
Exactly. The modern cultural vision of sipping Mai Tais on a beach for the rest of your life is essentially a desire for drug-induced unconsciousness.
Sounds good until you actually do it.
Right, it feels good for a week, and then you are completely miserable. Human beings are beasts of burden. We need a heavy load to pull. We need a goal that constantly recedes, a horizon of ever-expanding possibility.
But setting that massive goal triggers the trap of comparison. You look at something like Price's Law, which, just to clarify, is different from the 80-20 Pareto principle.
Yes.
Price's Law states that the square root of a group produces 50% of the output.
Which means in a company of, say, 10,000 employees, just 100 individuals are producing half the value. The inequality of outcome in human endeavors is an ironclad natural law.
That is mathematically terrifying if you are comparing yourself to the top. I mean, there will always be people drastically outperforming you.
Always.
There's a hilarious but honestly tragic anecdote in the transcripts about a guy who was deeply depressed about his career achievements, simply because his college roommate was Elon Musk.
It perfectly illustrates the absurdity of external comparison. You look at the person you are jealous of, but you're only looking through a tiny aperture.
You just see the highlight reel.
Exactly. You only see the absolute best, most heavily marketed slice of their life. You aren't seeing the grueling sacrifices, the broken relationships, or the psychological toll.
Right.
Musk himself has said his mind is a storm, and most people wouldn't actually want to be him.
So, if an ideal acts as a crushing judge of our current inadequacy, if looking at the peak of the mountain makes you feel like an absolute failure, how do you set a goal without it utterly paralyzing you?
You do what Peterson calls shrinking the dragon.
Shrink the dragon down.
Yes. If the gap between you and your ideal is so massive that it freezes you in place, you have created a dragon you cannot defeat.
It's just too big.
The solution is to lower the ideal. You shrink the dragon down until it is a size you are actually willing to confront, no matter how embarrassingly small that is.
Like deciding you want to get in shape, but the gym is too intimidating, so your goal for today is just putting on your running shoes and walking to the mailbox.
Exactly. That is a defeated dragon. You compare yourself only to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
I love that.
And the reason this works biologically and mathematically is rooted in what psychology calls the Matthew principle, taken from the biblical idea that to those who have, more will be given.
How does that apply to putting on running shoes, though?
It means that progress isn't linear, it is geometric. Psychological momentum compounds. If you get a tiny win today, your neurological baseline for confidence slightly increases.
Okay, so tomorrow is easier.
Exactly. That makes tomorrow's slightly larger task easier, even if your first steps are shameful in their tiny size. If you remain disciplined, your progress will speed up exponentially. You just have to get the flywheel spinning.
But you can't spin that flywheel in total isolation, though. I mean, your sanity isn't just a solo project locked inside your own skull.
No, not at all.
Your sanity is largely outsourced to the world and the people around you.
Which forces us to look at how we navigate relationships truthfully, starting from the very beginning. Peterson argues that if you are a parent of a child between 0 and 4 years old, your primary fundamental job is to make that child socially desirable.
Why specifically age 4?
Because age 4 is the developmental window where children transition from playing primarily with their parents to playing with peers.
Ah.
If you allow your child to act like a biting, screaming tyrant at home because you want to be their friend, you are setting them up for a lifetime of brutal rejection.
Because other 4-year-olds won't tolerate it.
Exactly. But if you socialize them well, you open up the entire world. Adults will genuinely welcome them and teach them, rather than faking goodwill because they secretly can't stand being around your kid.
So shielding a child from necessary social friction is actually a form of cruelty.
It is.
And this idea of embracing friction carries right into adult relationships. The discussions highlight a concept in romance called the Michelangelo effect.
It is a profound way to view a partnership. In a truly loving relationship, you are essentially chiseling away at each other to reveal the idealized, perfect version hidden beneath the rough stone.
Like sculpting a masterpiece.
Yes. But you have to remember, chiseling is not a peaceful process. It involves a hammer and a sharp edge.
It involves a lot of conflict.
It does.
Peterson uses this vivid, ancient imagery from the story of Genesis. When Adam and Eve were thrown out of paradise, God places cherubs at the gates with turning, flaming swords.
Swords that burn and cut away. The metaphor implies that to get back into paradise, everything unworthy in you, every bit of arrogance, deceit, or deadwood, has to be burned and cut away by those flaming swords.
That sounds painful.
It is. A good relationship does exactly this through necessary conflict. You don't avoid the hard conversations. You have 1,000 fights early on to get to the absolute bottom of your incompatibilities, and then you don't have to fight anymore. You achieve a negotiated peace.
That is such a stark contrast to what we see culturally championed right now, which is this idea of toxic compassion.
Right. Psychology often refers to this as the devouring mother archetype, or simply a shallow pond of empathy.
A shallow pond.
Yeah. It describes a dynamic where you prioritize someone's short-term emotional comfort over their long-term thriving. Peterson points out how some pop stars constantly preach this sugary, toxic sentimentality about boundless empathy in public, but behind the scenes, they act as absolute tyrants to their staff.
Wow. Performative empathy.
Exactly. They are securing an unearned moral reputation without doing the hard work of actually helping people grow.
Because true help doesn't mean just telling people what they want to hear.
Never.
True help comes from deeply listening and finding out what actually works in reality. There's an example in the transcripts about the comedian Jimmy Carr.
Oh, the comedy club example.
Yeah. He doesn't just assume he knows what's funny. He tests his material by doing 200 shows in front of small, gritty audiences just to see what people naturally laugh at.
Right.
He listens to the reality of the audience's reaction rather than forcing his ego onto them.
Listening is a transformative, almost magical exercise. If you actually listen to the people in your life without planning your own rebuttal, they will literally tell you what is wrong with them and how to fix it.
But what about our enemies? It's one thing to listen to a spouse or an audience, but what about the critics who just want to tear you down?
Yeah.
The natural human instinct is to ignore them, block them, or attack back.
Dealing with enemies requires a dual approach. First, there is the biblical injunction, do not cast pearls before swine.
All right.
If people are genuinely acting in bad faith, if they aren't listening and just want to trample your ideas, you stop talking to them. You pull back your energy.
That makes sense.
But the second part of the approach is the twist. Your harshest critics are incredibly valuable.
Because they actively hunt for the cracks in your armor.
Exactly. An enemy is highly motivated to expose your blind spots. Your friends will often overlook your minor flaws to keep the peace.
Because they love you.
Right. Your enemies will not. They will highlight flaws in your character and your arguments that you were completely blind to.
Which hurts, but it's useful.
Extremely useful. It forces you to step carefully. It forces you to stop being stupid in the exact ways they are pointing out. If you can withstand the initial sting of the attack and use it to refine your own behavior, the hostile criticism of an enemy actually becomes a massive developmental gift.
Wow. Let's pull all these threads together. Today's deep dive has been a heavy but incredibly practical journey into human architecture.
Very heavy, yeah.
We started with the realization that our brains are ancient, serotonin-driven status-tracking machines. But the way to navigate that hierarchy isn't by wearing a fake Pinocchio persona.
Right, because faking it creates a schism in your psyche that hollows you out. We have to rely on default honesty.
And we have to be willing to integrate our own shadow, to realize that we are fully capable of malevolence, and to use tools like the bed exercise to actively hunt down our own minor corruptions before they grow.
And we embrace the uphill climb because our dopamine systems require a receding goal.
Right. We avoid the trap of comparing ourselves to the top of Price's Law by shrinking the dragon. We make the ideal small enough to confront today, relying on the Matthew principle to compound our geometric progress.
And finally, we don't do it alone. We use the friction of honest relationships, the flaming swords, to burn away our dead wood.
It is a continuous voluntary process of letting the old, insufficient parts of yourself die so that a more capable version can be born.
Beautifully said.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to take away today. These transcripts dive deeply into the concept of sacrifice. The idea that work itself is fundamentally about sacrificing the pleasures of the present for a better future.
Right.
But the great danger is trying to claim the reward without putting in the real sacrifice, which leads to unearned wisdom.
Which is very dangerous.
So consider this as you go about your week. If you are feeling chronically bitter, resentful, or stuck in your life right now, is it possible that your frustration is actually a demand for a sacrifice you are refusing to make? What piece of deadwood are you currently protecting that is blocking your own path back into paradise?
It's a heavy question. Sometimes the very thing we are fighting hardest to hold on to is the exact weight keeping us from moving forward.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep shrinking your dragons, and remember, your biological counter might be 1/3 of a billion years old, but you still get to choose how you carry yourself. Stand up straight, tell the truth. We'll catch you next time.